borough of Brooklyn, which is behind me and over there. It is a great and important part of Brooklyn. If Brooklyn were separated from the rest of New York, it would be the third largest city in the United States, following only behind Los Angeles and Chicago. So this is an awesome place. I did grow up here, and when I grew up, will reveal how old I am. This was a parochial backwater, and we were thought to be people who understood nothing about how to use the English language correctly, or that there was a world beyond our borders, and it was a place that you escaped from as soon as you graduated from high school. Today, it is filled with artisanal beer and cheese, hipsters, artists, startup companies, musicians, and now, if you are below the age of 30, you live in Brooklyn, because only people with baby carriages live in Manhattan. So, important for our conference today is that Brooklyn is this incredibly diverse place. I know that the borough of Queens gets a lot of press about being diverse, but Brooklyn is diverse. 32% of Brooklynites are non-Hispanic blacks or African Americans. 10% of us are non-Hispanic Asians. 20% are Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. We come from all around the world: Haiti, Pakistan, China, India, Bangladesh, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Haiti, Barbados, Korea, Germany, Italy, Italian, et cetera, et cetera. And I mention this because I think the amalgam of cultures and religions and ethnicities and races that are here in Brooklyn are about what this conference is about: law, intersectionality, and the new wave of social movements in the Trump era. Trump is a man who has responded to the fact that the United States will be a majority country of minority people by seeking to separate us. During his campaign, he frequently presented a man by the name of Jamil Shaw, a man saddened by the murder of his son, and described him as the father of a person who had been killed by a, quote, illegal, close quote, immigrant. He has sought to have us think that Muslims are evil terrorists, so those of us who are Christians, Hindi, Jewish, or Jain will distinguish ourselves from Muslims. He has sought to describe China as the new boogeyman international country of the world, so that first we won't think about the Soviet Union. And also, if we are from India or Japan or Korea or Senegal, we will differentiate ourselves from the Chinese who are here in the United States. He has sought to demonize those who come from the Middle East, so those of us who are from Pakistan or Ecuador will distinguish ourselves from those folks. He has sought to distinguish us, to demonize the immigrants from Mexico, so those of us who are from Jamaica or Brazil or Ireland will separate ourselves from them. And he has described the black neighborhoods of the United States as centers of despair, filled with gangs and drugs, so those of us who live in Chinese, Italian, Nepalese, or German communities will distinguish ourselves from them. He does this, I think, because he knows that if we demonize each other and we separate ourselves from each other, it will be much easier for the group that he belongs to run this country. That is extremely rich, white men who were born in the United States. It is only by separating us that his very small portion of America can rule us. So it brings me back to this conference, which I think is wonderful because it's been sponsored by NEPOC and CAPALF. I don't say that properly, I apologize. It is a cooperative venture that by its very formation seeks to reject that image of what we should be. Our conference call says that it is a conference where we, as scholars and activists, will discuss what role we can play in forging new alliances and strengthening existing ones. This is a cooperative venture. The folks who helped to put together are Desiree Kennedy, Elaine Chu, Deborah Post, Sabine Rahman, Rebecca Lee, Sue Setti, and Rose Cuisin Villazor. I apologize, Rose. So I want to thank those folks for putting this conference together. And then there's this long collection of other people I have to thank very much because we are here only because of them. They include, but are not limited to, our event staff, Chris Gibbons, Elizabeth Alper, and Dasha Tanner. Our IT staff, Kurt Banton, and Alan Volney, and Shantae Scott. Bennett's faculty assistant, Beth Palastro. The Sterling dining room catering group, which include but are not limited to Johnny Munata, I apologize guys, Melanie Giovanni Daza. I also want to thank the students, Danielle Clayton, David Jacobson, Paul Jung. I want to thank St. John's Journal and the Brooklyn Journal, which will publish our papers. I think I've got the entire list of people, and if I don't have everybody, I'm really sorry, because this is just a collaborative effort of the greatest sort. And so thank you very much, all of you, for helping us. And I'm now going to turn it over to the last name I have on my list is Bennett Capers, because I knew I would forget him if I didn't put it on the list.
So I'm glad Beryl mentioned that this is a joint conference, again, CAPALF and NEPOC, because one of the things NEPOC does every year is they give an award to somebody that they think is incredible. So this year it was an easy choice, Peggy Cooper Davis. We have a plaque for you, but before we give you the plaque, we're going to make you earn it by speaking. But first we're going to turn to, and if you look at the program, in the back of the program, it talks about the award and why we have the award, so I'm not going to go into that right now. What we did is we asked one of Peggy's former students to introduce her. So I'm going to turn it over to Professor Anna Roberts, who's going to introduce Peggy Cooper Davis, this year's recipient of Hayward, Beryl, and Shanara Gilbert Award. And then at the end of Peggy's speech, we were going to hand you the plaque and take some photos.
Good afternoon. I've been asked to keep my remarks to 2 sentences. And since the request came from our award winner, Peggy Cooper Davis, and since there's no one I like and respect more, I shall honor it. But first, I need to give some context for those sentences. Peggy was my first and best law professor. And one of the very, very many things she taught me was the importance of having a handle on statistics. So I decided to work with a sample of the extraordinary work that Peggy has done, her scholarship, since here we are at a scholarly gathering. And let's take a sample of wise and brilliant scholars. Let's take the scholars at this conference. And let's think about some of their work, some of your work, and some of the ways in which Peggy has influenced it. Peggy has written brilliant critiques of child welfare proceedings, critiques that inspired Alina Das as she critiqued our civil immigration detention system. Peggy has analyzed the gender bias caused by stereotypes in litigation, an analysis that Jack Chin drew on as he dissected the Asian exclusion cases and the racial considerations that may have motivated some of those decisions. Peggy's analysis of the complexities of white flight and its role in the fact pattern of Moore versus East Cleveland, a crucial role that the Supreme Court glossed over, was celebrated in Robin Lenhart's analysis of that case. The stories shared by Peggy of enslaved families and the ways in which she connected them to the meaning of the 14th Amendment inspired Mario Barnes as he wrote about the failure of formal legal narratives to reflect the experiences of Black women, such as his grandmother. Peggy's groundbreaking interpretation of the Reconstruction Amendments in the context of family rights inspired, among others, Priscilla Otchin, as she called for an expanded reading of the 8th Amendment, guided by the 13th, to put an end to the shackling of women during labor. and Robin Linhart as she analyzed the role of anti-miscegenation case law in same-sex marriage litigation. And Peggy's seminal discussion of the law as microaggression illuminated analyses by many, including the following: Frank Rudy Cooper explaining how Terry versus Ohio enabled racial profiling, Anthony Farley explaining the composition of the color line in the context of voting rights, Darren Hutchinson describing the ways in which the Supreme Court's construction of equality sustains hierarchies, Terry Smith explaining the nature of subtle discrimination in the workplace and the intersection of the First Amendment and social subordination, and Bennett Capers analyzing racial profiling, the flying of the Confederate flag, and the flag's legal treatment. Now for my 2 sentences. Sentence 1. What an extraordinary thing to have written so powerfully and perceptively about injustices that you inspire and enable others to do the same in areas that span disenfranchisement, immigration enforcement, housing segregation, workplace discrimination, police abuse, racist imagery, prisoner abuse, and sex and sexual orientation discrimination. Areas whose importance has, shall we say, not gone away. What an extraordinary thing to have written so powerfully and perceptively about your visions of hope and justice, that you've inspired proposals that would reinterpret, expand, and enrich the First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, Eighth Amendment, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and Title VII. And of course, citations don't begin to tell the full story of all the ways in which your influence is felt. Sentence 2. To achieve so much and inspire so much takes, of course, brilliance, creativity, compassion, hope, patience, bravery, so much work, and so much love. And in honor of all of those and their unique amalgam, it's my deep pleasure to introduce our 2017 Hayward Burns Shanara Gilbert Award winner, Professor Peggy Cooper Davis.
All right, I have to switch to my reading glasses. You have an aged awardee who needs many pairs of glasses. Anna, thank you. I don't know how to thank you, but I have here that I want to salute you. And Anna was not only my student, but my colleague when she was on the faculty of the lawyering program at NYU, and has been my colleague since then in several endeavors. I think of her as a comrade. Her scholarship is impeccable, enlightening, and grounded, as you must have guessed, in social justice principles. It's work that I lean on and that my students lean on. Her teaching is rigorous and empowering. It's a privilege to teach with her. I want to salute Bennett, who, I don't know, got a little bit cheated by being the last mentioned as a convener of this affair. I have the pleasure of working with Bennett on a book that he's collaborating on of critical race judgments. And these are Supreme Court opinions rewritten by critical race scholars. And we gathered here a group of the authors of that book for a wonderful session that Bennett organized. And so, looking at this session and thinking back on that one not so long ago, I think of Bennett as a fulcrum for legal scholars of color, and I thank him for that. But I also want to salute all of you, and I want to salute your courage. Your courage as teachers and your courage as scholars. Your scholarly records, your records in your institutions, and your presence here attest to that courage. Most, I dare say all of us have taken knocks for the choices we've made as scholars and teachers, for our decisions to draw on what we know and on the insights we have as scholars of color, as scholars from other marginalized groups, as women, and as people committed first to social justice. I want to speak first about courageous teaching. A few years ago, I wrote this peculiar thing, which I'll read to you. An invisible demon walks the halls of all the law schools I've known, vexing the learning environment and discouraging engagement. This demon is a special breed of the dysfunctional hierarchy species. It has 3 heads. The middle head, intelligence bias, does most of the demon's thinking. On either side are the smoky nostriled head of intellectual segregation and the fire-breathing head of tracking. My proposal for improving legal education is that we take up our swords and slay the demon. Without it, law schools could stop the much criticized practice of sharpening minds by narrowing them, and instead cultivate the intellectual versatility that professional excellence requires. What did I mean? I meant that for the most part, educators cultivate and respect only one of the many kinds of intelligence that are required for excellence in practice and in social analysis. I argued that legal educators do a disservice by establishing a hierarchy in which some kinds of analysis are cultivated and privileged, and other equally essential kinds of analysis are disparaged and left uncultivated. So, for example, playing logic games, a decidedly important skill, make no mistake. But it is cultivated and privileged while sociocultural analysis, psychological intelligence, and rhetorical power are ignored. I noticed, of course, that this particular hierarchy demeans and alienates women and social minorities disproportionately. I've also written about another kind of hierarchy that disfigures legal education and marginalizes the disempowered. That is the hierarchy of classrooms in which students are fed knowledge and doctrine, misled about the extent to which knowledge and doctrine are fixed and certain, and denied the opportunity to construct new understandings, denied the sense of power that one feels, knowing that one can construct new understandings. I alluded to what Fieri called the banking method by which facts and ideas are poured into passive brains. This kind of hierarchy involves the roles of dominant donor and passive recipient, and as a result, as one scholar put it, classroom roles embody covert and overt power, control, and all too often marginalization. Many of you, I know, counter these disempowering and marginalizing patterns in your clinical work, in your simulation work, and in the modifications you've made on large class teaching. You've done what education guru Dorothy Heathcote calls giving students the mantle of the expert, and then challenging them to gather and use information The use is critical, and blend their insights and skills to solve problems rather than to simply learn stuff. Unseating marginalizing and disempowering patterns requires courage, and I salute you for the courage that so many of you have shown. I also salute the courage of your scholarship. I salute you not just for the powerful things you have written, but also and relatedly for being here and being true to who you are. I've written several articles and even a book to argue that the font of our constitutional traditions should no longer be the founding of the 1770s, but should now be the reconstruction of the 1860s. I argue that rather than claim the first Constitution's compromise with slavery, we should claim Reconstruction's guarantees of human freedom. In a musty old article in which I make this argument, as I have done repeatedly, I'm afraid, I explained why I honor your courage, and I talked a bit about how difficult it has been to make the arguments that I've just described. So I'm going to repeat an epilogue that I included in this article. It was called In Defense of a Maligned Methodology. I want clearly and explicitly to label the preceding analysis a work of critical race and, to a lesser extent, feminist legal theory. I do not do this because I have a definitive definition of critical race or feminist legal theory and know that my work meets that definition. There are no definitive definitions. Some who are called critical race scholars or feminist legal theorists would undoubtedly define me out of the movement. Still, I define myself as a critical race theorist because I attempt in all of my work to cultivate and to draw upon three perspectives that characterize what I take to be the best of critical work: an appreciation of the role of narrative and social constructs in legal and political process and decision-making, a focus on the cultural, social, and linguistic patterns according to which arguments are heard or dismissed, acted upon or neglected in legal and political process, and an activist commitment to giving effect to neglected stories, to stories that have not had the hearing or effect they deserve to have in legal and political discourse. The critical race theory and feminist legal theory movements have suffered an egregious case of unflattering definition by intellectual and political opponents, too many to number. I don't refer to the many fair and honest critiques of our work that thoughtful scholars have offered, nor do I refer to the sometimes rough and tumble exchanges we have among ourselves. I refer to the work of a small group of often popular writers, most of them associated with conservative think tanks, who've enjoyed great success. And here I cited an article, an old article, necessarily, by someone named Heather McDonald, who said in that article that critical race and feminist legal theory are a dangerous collection of subjective whinings by people who reject any and all truth criteria, arguing that there is no truth, but only the power to legitimize one's self-serving stories. It would be wise, I suppose, to define oneself out of such a movement. Many people have seen this. I recall speaking with a member of a hiring committee at a prestigious law school about an African American scholar who was a candidate, and she seemed to be doing well on the interview and job talk circuit. The person I was speaking with said, this candidate is doing well. She has the good sense not to call herself a critical race theorist. But it seems to me that we will never bring adequate attention and resources to remedying social ills, or expose and unseat oppressive power, or enable free and equal communal exchange if we deter to this kind of defensiveness. So, again, I salute you for the courage of your work. Having saluted you twice and having saluted folks in the audience, I want to add Babe Howell, who was also a wonderful former colleague. Just made a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Babe. But a salute to the people for whom this award was named. I did not know Shanara Gilbert. Perhaps some of you did. But I hope I don't slight her importance if I offer in closing a word about Hayward Burns, the brilliant giant for whom this award is also named and who was my friend. Some of you are perhaps too young to have known him with his passion for justice and his Frederick Douglass mane, in case you haven't seen it. That's Hayward. As you know, he and Shanara Gilbert were killed in an automobile accident in South Africa in 1996. They had been attending a conference associated with the movement of which Hayward was an important part to dismantle apartheid. Hayward had done so much. He had been dean of CUNY Law School, at which empowering experiential learning for lawyering in the public interest has been pioneered. And he had been on the front lines of social justice lawyering. I can't name all the battles in which he was involved. He was at the Legal Defense Fund. He was involved in the representation of Angela Davis, in the representation of inmates after the Attica uprising, and on and on. At his death, a former colleague described a time when he held 2 full-time jobs representing Attica inmates and teaching brilliantly at SUNY Buffalo. This former colleague said he lived on about 4 hours sleep a night. I don't recommend that. He would go to sleep around midnight or 1 a.m. and get up around 4 a.m. He taught a full load and taught very well, and the students loved him. At the same time, he was coordinating the defense for the Attica uprising, which was both an intellectual and an administrative challenge of enormous complexity. The life lived by this son of sharecroppers and grandson of slaves is reflected in a poem that hung over his desk for 20 years. I've read that Hayward was a poet himself, but this poem was not his. It was by Marge Piercy, and I will read it to you. The people I love best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shadows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing, well done, has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were meant to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. Needless to say, it is deeply humbling to receive an award created in honor of Hayward Burns and Shanara Gilbert. I feel wildly undeserving, but nonetheless, I thank you.
I'm pretty inept at opening a box, but
You'd be terrible at Christmas morning. Oh, it's beautiful.
so on behalf of NEPOC, I'm glad to give you this award.
Thank
Thank you.
so much.